Well, are you ready to get into Yah's Word today? I am as well. I want to invite you to open your Bibles with me to Exodus chapter 13, and we're going to begin with verse 17 in just a moment. We're tracking along with the Torah portion for this week, and we're going to be looking at the period of time when the children of Israel were driven out of Mitzrayim or out of Egypt. And the scripture says that Yah, by his presence, led them a particular way, a special way. Not the shortest route, which would have been through the land of the Philistines, because the Philistines were a warrior type people. They would have fought against them. And Yah knew that the children of Israel would be discouraged and would give up and would go back to Mitzrayim, and he didn't want that. So he led them by way of the wilderness of the Sea of Reeds. In essence, he led them in a path that they could manage by easy stages. And so we're going to talk about that principle, because we're going to see that principle also in a wonderful passage in the second writings in Acts chapter 15. And Acts chapter 15 is really the fulfillment of the picture that Exodus chapter 13, beginning with verse 17, paints. And so I have entitled this message, Come Out of Egypt and Learn the Ways of Torah. Let's begin with Exodus chapter 13, starting with verse 17. It says, And it came to be, when Pharaoh had let the people go, that Elohim did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, though that was nearer. The land of the Philistines is only a few days' journey to the land of Canaan, or the promised land. But there's a reason why Elohim didn't lead them that way. He goes on to say, For Elohim said, Lest the people regret when they see fighting and return to Mitzrayim. So Yah knew that they were not in a condition at that point to fight with the Philistines, that they would give up, they would be overwhelmed, the burden would be too great, and they would retreat and they would return to Mitzrayim. And so Yah did not want to overwhelm them. He wanted to lead them to the land that he had promised them, the land of Canaan, the promised land, in easy steps that would allow them to arrive without being discouraged and without retreating back to Mitzrayim. He goes on to say, So Elohim led the people around by way of the wilderness of the Sea of Reeds, and the children of Israel went up in fives, or in marching formation, from the land of Mitzrayim. And so Yah had a plan to get them there. He wasn't going to overwhelm them. He wasn't going to allow them to come under great burdens that would discourage them and lead them to return to Mitzrayim. It says, And Moshe took the bones of Yosef with him, for he certainly made the children of Israel swear, saying, Elohim shall certainly visit you, and you shall bring my bones from here with you. And they departed from Sukkot and camped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness. And Yah went before them, his presence went before them by day in a column of cloud. The cloud brought shade and coolness from the desert heat. And Yah went before them by day in a column of cloud to lead the way, and by night in a column of fire, which would bring, not only would they be able to see it well at night, but it would bring warmth in the coolness of the temperature of the wilderness at night. And by night in a column of fire to give them light, so as to go by day and night. The column of cloud did not cease by day, nor the column of fire by night before the people. And so we see they are leaving Mitzrayim. They are leaving the burdensome rule of the evil sovereign Pharaoh. And Pharaoh represents the devil. They are getting free from the shackles and the chains of the taskmasters who represent demon forces. They are liberated from slavery in Mitzrayim, slavery in Egypt, which represents the slavery of sin in the world. And they're coming out. They're coming out of Mitzrayim. They're coming out of Egypt. And they're going to the land promised to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Yaakov. They're going to the land of Canaan. And Yah understands that if he leads them through the land of the Philistines, they are going to be discouraged. They're going to be overwhelmed. They're not going to want to engage in battle, and they're going to return to Mitzrayim. He doesn't want that to happen. So he leads them through the wilderness of the Sea of Reeds, in a cloud by day and a fire by night. He's personally escorting them so that they can arrive to their destination in the promised land, the land of Canaan, in safety, and not be discouraged and return back to Mitzrayim. So we have a second writings equivalent of this passage in Acts chapter 15. And so we're going to go to Acts chapter 15, and we're going to begin with verse 1. It says here, "And certain men came down from Yehudah and were teaching the brothers." These are believers in Yeshua. And these brothers are people, in essence, who had come out of the nations. They are the Goyim, the nations, coming to Elohim through belief in Yeshua. And so there were certain men who came down from Yehudah. These are Jewish believers. And notice what it says, "And they were teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the practice of Moshe, you are unable to be saved." And so we have these Goyim, these people of the nations, believing in Yeshua. They're just beginning their journey out of paganism, out of the nations. And one of the first things that happens here is that believing Jews come and they begin to teach you have to be circumcised. Well, in essence, circumcision is the last thing that happens when a person converts to Judaism. So the last thing that happens typically when a person is converting to Judaism is that they are circumcised. And these Jews who were believers in Yeshua thought that the Goyim, when they believed in Yeshua, needed to convert to Judaism. They needed to be circumcised. It says, "Unless you are circumcised according to the practice of Moshe, you are unable to be saved." And so they were saying, you can't be saved. It doesn't matter if you say you believe. You have to convert, in essence. You have to be circumcised. Well, notice what it says here. "So when Shaul and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with them," so Shaul and Barnabas did not believe what they were teaching. "They arranged for Shaul and Barnabas and certain others of them to go up to Jerusalem to the emissaries and elders about this question." And so they're not even talking about, we are so glad and so blessed to hear that the Goyim have believed upon Yeshua and have received the set-apart spirit of Yah and have begun this wonderful walk with Yeshua in the ways of Yah. They're not talking about that. They're talking about you have to be circumcised. If you're not circumcised, you can't even be saved. If you don't convert to Judaism, in essence, you can't be saved. And Shaul and Barnabas said, you don't know what you're talking about. We totally disagree with that. And so they agreed to go up to Jerusalem and to meet with the emissaries and the elders about this question. Verse 3, "So being sent on their way by the assembly, they passed through Phoenicia and Shomaron, relating the conversion of the nations So they're already talking about the fact that the nations are coming to Yah through belief in Yeshua. And as they were along the way, they were making certain stops along the way and talking about, hey, the nations have believed in Yeshua and have received the set-apart spirit of Yah. Yah has poured out his spirit upon them. It says, and they were causing great joy to all the brothers. And yet there were some brothers in Jerusalem or in Yehudah saying they can't be saved unless they are circumcised. It says, and having arrived in Jerusalem, they were received by the assembly and the emissaries and the elders, and they reported all that Elohim had done with them, or through the ministry. And some of the believers who belonged to the sect of the Pharisees rose up. So we have Pharisees who are believers in Yeshua. This is evidence in Scripture that there were Pharisees who believed in Yeshua. It says, and some of the believers who belonged to the sect of the Pharisees, Shaul was a Pharisee, Yeshua's teachings are more in line with the Pharisees, rose up saying, it is necessary to circumcise them and to command them to keep the Torah of Moshe. Well, I would agree that they need to walk in the ways of Yeshua, and Yeshua walked in the ways of the Torah of Moshe. The problem here is that the Jewish religion had added many made up rules and regulations and laws, the takanot and the maasim of the Pharisees. And it had become so burdensome to try to follow in the traditions of the religion of Yehudaism or Judaism. It was a burden for many to even attempt to keep all those rules and regulations. I'm not talking about the Torah itself, the written Torah, the Torah of Yah. I'm talking about the added rules and regulations of the Pharisees, of those who are dictating the culture of the religion of Yehudaism or Judaism. Let me read it again. And some of the believers who belonged to the sect of the Pharisees rose up saying, it is necessary to circumcise them and to command them to keep the Torah of Moshe. And their implication here is to keep all of what they would call the Torah, which is the written Torah and the oral Torah. They call it the oral Torah. They have no proof that there was a legitimate oral Torah. But what they're really implying is that they are to obey all of the takanot and the maasim, the added rules and regulations and the precedents of the religious influencers. What the religious influencers are saying, the people had to do. The added culture of the religion of Yehudaism or Judaism. And so, in essence, they were saying these goyim, these people who are coming out of the nations, believing in Yeshua, they need to convert to Judaism. It goes on to say in verse 6, and the emissaries and elders came together to look into this matter. And when there had been much dispute, this was not an easy matter to solve. There was much dispute over this issue. Kephah rose up and said to them, men, brothers, you know that a good while ago Elohim chose among us that by my mouth the nations should hear the word of the good news and believe. So he's saying, I'm the one who went and proclaimed the good news message of Yeshua and Teshuvah and Yeshua's lifestyle of Torah obedience to the nations. And they heard and they believed. And Elohim, who knows the heart, bore witness to them by giving them the set-apart spirit as also to us. So even before they were circumcised. They certainly hadn't converted to Judaism. But Yah, who knew their heart, he knew that they had believed upon Yeshua. Yah bore witness to them. How did he bear witness to them? By giving them the set-apart spirit. In other words, it was the set-apart spirit of Yah placed upon them that was the seal, so to speak, the proof that Yah had approved of them. He had received them. Let me read it again. And Elohim, who knows the heart, bore witness to them by giving them the set-apart spirit, as also to us. They've received the same spirit of Yah that we have. And now you're trying to make it difficult on them. You're trying to make it hard on them. You're demanding that they meet some religious qualifications. You may be discouraging them. If you overwhelm them, they may return back to the nations. You see where we're going with this? Let me read it again. And Elohim, who knows the heart, bore witness to them by giving them the set-apart spirit, as also to us, and made no distinction between us and them, cleansing their hearts by belief. So he's saying, these who have come out of the nations, their hearts are cleansed by belief. They've received the same set-apart spirit of Yah that we Jewish believers have received. Now then, why do you try Elohim? Why do you try him? Why are you putting him to the test? Because he's already confirmed that he's received them. He knows their hearts. He's poured out his spirit upon them. He's witnessed to the world by pouring out his spirit upon them that they've been accepted. And you are testing him. You are trying him. Now then, why do you try Elohim? By putting a yoke on the neck of the taught ones, which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear. It's a similar yoke to when they were in Mitzrayim, when they were in Egypt, and they were under hard labor. They were in slavery, burdened down, overwhelmed, and Yah set them free. And Mitzrayim was a place of paganism, of multiple deities, and they've been set free. And then we see over here in Acts chapter 15, the people are coming out of the nations. They're coming out of paganism. They're coming out of idolatry. And what do some of these believing Jews want to do? They want to put them in a yoke of mixed up religion, a yoke of a religion that had added to the Torah countless man-made rules, regulations, and laws. And so Shimon Kephas pushing back on this. Now then, why do you try Elohim by putting a yoke on the neck of the taught ones? Speaking of these new believers, which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear. He's not talking about the written Torah. He's talking about all the man-made rules and regulations of the religious influencers. He's talking about all this added religious culture. They've just been set free from paganism, from idolatry, from a wicked, evil culture of religion, false religion, and then you want to drag them in and put a yoke on their neck of mixed up religion and the culture of the religious influencers who had added scores and scores and scores of laws and what they would consider to be rules, things that people had to do if they're going to live within the culture of the religion. And Shimon Kephah is pushing back on them. And he's saying, which our fathers, nor we, were able to bear these things. But through the favor of the Master Yeshua Messiah, we trust to be saved in the same way as they. So we trust to be saved through our belief in Yeshua. Yes, it's a belief that produces obedience to the commandments of Yah. Yes, we know that. We're not debating whether the new believers should obey the commandments of Yah. Shimon Kephah is saying we shouldn't force them to convert to this religious system and to accept all the man-made added religious rules and regulations. They knew something because Shimon Kephah had been there and learned from Yeshua that not one stone would remain upon another of all the buildings on Temple Mount. That they were all coming down, that whole system was coming down. And so why bring them out of a wicked, religious, paganistic, multiple deity system through their belief in Yeshua and make them convert into another religious system that was ultimately going to come down anyway? It doesn't make any sense. And that's what Shimon Kephah is talking about here. Now, let's go over to Acts chapter 10 and let's read about the message of Yeshua and Teshuvah and Yeshua's lifestyle of Torah obedience coming to the Goyim. Acts chapter 10, we'll go over there quickly. Acts chapter 10, beginning with verse 24. And the following day they entered into Caesarea, or Caesarea, and Cornelius was waiting for them, having called together his relatives and close friends. So this is a man who was an Elohim fearer. He actually attended the synagogue. He loved the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov. He lived his life in a manner that was pleasing to Yah, obeying the commandments. He gave to the Jewish nation, to the synagogue. He prayed to the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov regularly. And through his giving and his praying, he got the attention of Yah. And Yah told him to send some men to Yaffo and to call upon Shimon Kephah and to have him come to Caesarea and to proclaim a truth that will bring salvation to him and his family. And so he was a believer in the sense of he believed in the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov. He obeyed the commandments, but he had not yet converted to Judaism. And he had not yet submitted to circumcision. And so we have an example here of people from the nations who believe, but they've not yet been circumcised. And notice what happens here. It says, and Cornelius was waiting for them, having called together his relatives and close friends. And it came to be that when Kephah entered, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and bowed before him. But Kephah raised him up, saying, stand up, I myself am also a man. And talking with him, he went in and found many who had come together. So he learned from that great sheet vision that there was no way that the nations could defile him or make him common by having interaction with them. Because in Judaism, there was a law, a rule that said the Jews were not to go into the homes of Gentiles. And so even though Yeshua told the emissaries to go into all the world to proclaim the good news to every creature, they hadn't yet left. They were still in Israel because of this man-made rule that they weren't supposed to go into the houses of Gentiles and have fellowship with them. But that great sheet vision changed all that for Shimon Kephah. So he went into the house of Cornelius and his family and friends. Verse 27, and talking with him, he went in and found many who had come together. And he said to them, you know that a Yehudi man is not allowed to associate with or go to one of another race, or go to the Gentiles is what he's saying. But Elohim has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. That is why I came without hesitation when I was sent for. So I asked, why have you sent for me? And Cornelius said, 4 days ago I was fasting until this hour, and at the 9th hour I prayed in my house, and see, a man stood before me in shining garments, and said, Cornelius, your prayer has been heard, and your kind deeds were remembered before Elohim. Now send to Yaffo and call Shimon here, who is also called Kephah. He is staying in the house of Shimon, a leather tanner by the sea. When he comes, he shall speak to you. So I sent to you immediately, and you have done well to come. And now we are all present before Elohim to hear all that you have been commanded by Elohim. And opening his mouth, Kephah said, truly, I see that Elohim shows no partiality, but in every nation, he who fears him and works righteousness is accepted by him. So every nation is welcomed into the family of Yah if those who are in the nations will fear him or respect him, honor him, love him the way he wants to be loved through obedience and works righteousness. In other words, obeys the commandments. And that's what Cornelius and his family, that's what they were doing. They were attending synagogue. They were hearing the Torah, the Tanakh, read every week. They were living it out as best as they could. They had not converted to Judaism. They were not circumcised. And yet, what is Kephah saying? He's saying here that Yah shows no partiality, and in every nation, those who fear him and those who work righteousness are accepted by him. He sent the word to the children of Israel, bringing the good news, peace, through Yeshua Messiah. He is master of all. We continue. You know what word came to be throughout all Yehudah, beginning from Galil after the immersion which Yochanan proclaimed, how Elohim did anoint Yeshua of Nazareth with the set-apart spirit, the spirit of Yah, and with power, who went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil, for Elohim was with him. And we are witnesses of all he did, both in the country of the Yehudim and in Jerusalem, whom they even killed by hanging on a timber. Elohim raised up this one on the 3rd day and let him be seen, not to all the people, but to witnesses, those having been chosen before by Elohim, to us who ate and drank with him after he arose from the dead. And he commanded us to proclaim to the people and to witness that it is he who was appointed by Elohim to be judge of the living and the dead. To this one all the prophets bear witness that through his name everyone believing in him does receive forgiveness of sins. Everyone, including the nations. While Kephah was still speaking these words, the set-apart spirit fell upon all those hearing the word. And those of the circumcision, the Jews who were believers, who were with him, who believed, were astonished, as many as came with Kepha, because the gift of the set-apart Spirit had been poured out on the nations also. For they were hearing them speaking with tongues and extolling Elohim. Then Kepha answered, is anyone able to forbid water, that these should not be immersed, who have received the set-apart Spirit, even as also we? And he commanded them to be immersed in the name of Yeshua Messiah. Then they asked him to remain a few days. And so we see that Yah knew their hearts. He knew that they had believed. And he poured out his set-apart Spirit upon them as a sign, as a witness to Kepha and the other Jews who were believers, that Yah had accepted the Goyim, the nations. And it doesn't say that they went immediately out and circumcised Cornelius and his family, those males in his family. It says that they water immersed him. And the water immersion is the place where the circumcision of the heart takes place. So circumcision did take place that day. It was the circumcision of the heart. Hallelujah. And let's take a look at Matthew chapter 24. I mentioned it a moment ago when I said that Shimon Kepha knew some things about the religious system that he was a part of in that day. The religion called Yehudaism. Matthew chapter 24, beginning with verse 1, it says, and going out, Yeshua went away from the set-apart place, talking about the temple on Temple Mount, and his taught ones came near to point out to him the buildings of the set-apart place, how majestically they had been built. And Yeshua said to them, do you not see all these? Truly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another at all, which shall not be thrown down. And so Yeshua is prophesying of the destruction of the second temple. And so those emissaries, the emissaries of Yeshua, knew that at some point the temple would come down. And along with it, the altar and the Levitical priesthood and the sacrifices, because you can't make a sacrifice without the temple and without the altar and without the priesthood. And so they knew it was all coming down at some point. Let's go over to Hebrews 8, and I'll show you another interesting passage along these same lines. Hebrews chapter 8, beginning with verse 7, it says, for if that first covenant or that first marriage arrangement had been faultless, then no place would have been sought for a second. So the original covenant that was cut on Mount Sinai between Yah and his people was broken by the people because they went after false deities. They performed abominations. They didn't obey the Torah. They went to idols. They worshipped false deities. It says for finding fault with them. It doesn't say for finding fault with the Torah. The fault was with the people. He says, see, the days are coming, says Yah, when I shall conclude with the house of Israel and with the house of Yehudah a renewed or a new. There is something new about the new covenant. It's not just a renewed covenant. It's not the same covenant as before. There's something different about the new covenant. I know this translation says renewed. It's renewed in a couple of aspects. One is that it's cut with the same people group. It's cut with the house of Israel, the whole house of Israel, and it has the same marital vows, the 10 words, but there is something new about the new covenant, and that has to do with the promises that Yah has made to his new covenant bride, that he himself will place his Torah in their minds and write it upon their hearts, that he will take responsibility for their obedience. They're keeping covenant with him through obedience to his commandments. How's that going to happen? He's going to pour out his Spirit upon them to give them the power to love him the way he wants to be loved through obedience to the covenant commandments. Notice the new covenant is cut with the house of Israel and the house of Yehudah, not with a Roman-rooted Gentile church. If you want to be a part of the new covenant, you have to be grafted in to believing Israel. It says, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Mitzrayim, because they did not continue in my covenant, and I disregarded them, says Yah. Because this is the covenant that I shall make with the house of Israel after those days, says Yah, giving my laws in their mind. In other words, I'm going to put my Torah in their mind, and I shall write them on their hearts, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. These are the promises that Yah is making through his prophet for his new covenant bride, that he's going to take responsibility for their obedience, because he's going to empower them unto obedience by placing his Torah in their minds, writing it upon their hearts, and giving them his set-apart spirit. And the Spirit of Yah is going to empower them then to be obedient, to love Yah the way he wants to be loved through obedience, and also equipping them to go forth and share this powerful message of Yeshua and Teshuvah and Yeshua's lifestyle of Torah obedience throughout all the world. It goes on to say, and they shall by no means teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, know Yah, because they all shall know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them. That's because the Spirit of Yah is going to be upon them. And the Spirit of Yah is Yah. And the scripture says over and over again in the Psalms and in other places that Yah himself is going to teach his people. And so the Spirit of Yah is going to teach us about Yah, and we're all going to know Yah because we have the Spirit of Yah, and Yah teaches us through his Spirit. It goes on to say, because I shall forgive their unrighteousness and their sins and their lawlessnesses, I shall no longer remember. Listen to this. By saying renewed or new, he has made the first old. Now what becomes old and growing aged is near disappearing. And so at the time of the writing of Hebrews, the temple still stood on Temple Mount. But those who had an ear to Yah through his Spirit understood that that system, that religious system, was growing old and near to disappearing. So it makes no sense whatsoever for the believing nations to be forced to convert to a religion, a religious system that was going to disappear over time. I'm not talking about the Torah, the written Torah, the commandments of Yah. I'm talking about the religious culture, the man-made rules and regulations. Shimon Kephas said, don't force them to convert to Judaism and to take on that heavy burden. They've come out of a heavy burden of paganism. Let's not put them into a heavy burden of mixed up religion. Now, let's go over to Acts 15 again, and we'll continue there. We'll pick up with verse 12. And all the crowd was silent, and were listening to Barnabas and Shaul, declaring how many miracles and wonders Elohim did among the nations through them. And after they were silent, Yaakov answered, saying, Men, brothers, listen to me. Shimon has declared how Elohim first visited the nations to take out of them a people for his name. We just read that. And the words of the prophets agree with this, as it has been written, after this I shall return and rebuild the booth, or the tabernacle of David, which has fallen down. And I shall rebuild its ruins, and I shall set it up, so that the remnant of mankind shall seek Yah, even all the nations on whom my name has been called, says Yah, who is doing all this, who has made this known from of old. And this is a quotation of Amos 9, verses 11 and 12. It's talking about the booth, or the tent, or the tabernacle of David. Let's continue. Therefore I judge that we should not trouble those from among the nations who are turning to Elohim. Now, let's go and let's read a couple of passages about the tent of David and really the tabernacle of Moshe and where it was at the same time. We're going to go over to 1 Chronicles chapter 15, and we're going to begin with verse 1. Notice what it says here. And he built houses for himself in the city of David. This is speaking of sovereign David. Notice, and he prepared a place for the ark of Elohim and pitched a tent for it. This is the tent of David. Let's go over to verse 11. And David called for Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, and for the Levites, for Uriel, Asaiah, and Yoel, Shemaiah, and Eliel, and Aminadab, and said to them, you are the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites. Set yourselves apart, you and your brothers. Then you shall bring up the ark of Yah, Elohim of Israel, to the place I have prepared for it. So the ark is coming to the city of David, and it's going to be placed in the tent of David, because you did not do it the first time. Yah, our Elohim, broke out against us because we did not ask him about the right ruling. So the priests and the Levites set themselves apart to bring up the ark of Yah, Elohim of Israel, and the children of the Levites bore the ark of Elohim on their shoulders by its poles, as Moshe had commanded according to the word of Yah. And David spoke to the leaders of the Levites to appoint their brothers, the singers, with instruments of song, harps and lyres and cymbals, to lift up the voice with joy. And so there was one big tent, only one compartment. The ark of Yah was going to be placed in that tent. And the sacrifices that were made by the Levites are sacrifices of praise and thanksgiving through songs and musical instruments and dance. And that's how they offered sacrifices. There was no altar of burnt offering there. There were no animal sacrifices. They were sacrifices of the heart, thanksgiving and praise and singing and dancing and rejoicing and playing musical instruments. And that's how Yah was worshipped in the tent of David while the temple was being built. Now, where was the tabernacle of Moshe? That's an important question to ask and answer. Let's go over to Chronicles chapter 21, and we'll read verse 29. It says here, for the dwelling place of Yah, speaking of the tabernacle of Moshe, and the slaughter place of the ascending offering, that's the altar. That's where they were offering up sacrifices of animals, which Moshe had made in the wilderness, were at that time at the high place in Gibeon. And so in Gibeon, we have the tabernacle of Moshe. We have the priests there. We have the altar, and they're offering sacrifices, animal sacrifices, on the altar in Gibeon, which is interesting because you have animal sacrifices being offered on the altar in Gibeon by the priests, and then in the city of David, you have the tent of David, you have the ark of his presence. So his presence is there with the ark, and what do you have? You have the Levites, and what are they doing? Singing, dancing, clapping their hands, lifting their hands, playing music, rejoicing, giving thanksgiving, offering sacrifices of the heart. And there's no altar where animals are being sacrificed. And both of those places existed at the same time, which is a picture of what we've been reading about in Acts chapter 15. Let's go back over there and look at it again. Notice what it says here. And the words of the prophets agree with this, as it has been written. This is verse 15. Verse 16 now. After this I shall return and rebuild the booth of David, which has fallen down, and I shall rebuild its ruins, and I shall set it up. so that the remnant of mankind shall seek Yah, even all the nations on whom my name has been called, says Yah, who is doing all this, who has made this known from of old. And so the temple on Temple Mount was prophesied that it would be destroyed and brought down. And we have a prophecy of Amos that says the booth of David is going to be rebuilt. And the Levites, the priests, are going to offer up sacrifices of thanksgiving and praise and dance and clapping of hands and lifting of hands and singing and rejoicing. And when that tabernacle, that tent of David, is rebuilt, then all the nations are going to come into it. So why would you try to convert the nations into a culture of a religious system that was coming down? And so that's what they have in mind as they continue in this debate. This is Yaakov speaking. Look at verse 19 again. Therefore I judge that we should not trouble those from among the nations who are turning to Elohim. Don't try to put them in the temple on Temple Mount. Don't try to convert them into a religious system that's coming down, but instead see that they are the fulfillment of the prophecy of Amos, that they're going to worship Yah through belief in Yeshua, and their sacrifices are going to come from the heart, not on an altar of stone, but from an altar of flesh. They're going to sing, they're going to praise, they're going to offer sacrifices of thanksgiving. They're going to clap their hands. They're going to lift their hands. They're going to dance before Yah. They're going to rejoice before Him. And they're going to fulfill this wonderful prophecy of the booth of David being rebuilt so that all the nations can come in and worship Elohim through belief in Yeshua. So powerful. All right. Let me start with verse 19 again. Therefore I judge that we should not trouble those from among the nations who are turning to Elohim. That's an important phrase, turning to Elohim. They're just coming out of the nations. They're just coming out of paganism. They're just coming out of a mixed up religious system of multiple deities and all sorts of culture that's incorrect and runs contrary to the culture of the Torah. They are just now turning to Elohim. And Yaakov is saying we shouldn't burden them or trouble them as they are turning to Elohim. Just like as the people came out of Mitzrayim. Yah said, I'm not going to take them through the land of the Philistines. That would trouble them. But I'm going to take them by easy steps, by easy stages into the promised land. It says, but that we write to them, notice, to abstain from the defilements of idols. Number one, have them come out of idolatry. Have them leave the idolatrous pagan temples. This is all about pagan temple worship. Stop worshiping idols, number one. Number two, from whoring. We know what the Torah says about immoral sexual practices. But in light of the context here, this is talking about don't participate in temple prostitution, because in the pagan temples they had prostitutes and people would sleep with those prostitutes. They'd have abominable sexual practices with those prostitutes as an act of worship to these pagan deities, these false deities. And so these are first steps for those who are coming out of the nations, turning to Elohim. Number one, get out of those pagan temples. Stop your idolatry. Number two, don't engage anymore with temple prostitutes. Number three, it says, and from what is strangled. Don't offer any more sacrifices to demons, because that's how they would kill the animals in the pagan temples. They would strangle them. Why? Because they wanted the blood to remain in them as they ate them. They wanted to eat the blood. They thought that the blood made it more tasty and flavorful. And that's what they thought their pagan deities wanted them to do. So they would strangle the animals. The animals would suffer greatly as they died, and their blood would remain within their bodies. So you're not to offer to demons anymore. And then fourthly, and from blood. Abstain from blood. Don't eat the blood. All right? So what is this talking about? I've heard some people say, well, there's only 4 things that we, quote, Gentiles have to do. Just these 4 things. I don't see murder in those 4 things. Is it okay for you to murder? I don't see you shall not steal in those 4 things. Is that okay? I don't see that it says anything about coveting anything from your neighbor. Is that all right for you to covet? I don't think so. I think you're confused. These are first steps. We got to get these people from the nations out of the pagan temples. They need to stop worshiping idols in the pagan temples. They need to stop participating in temple prostitution. They need to quit offering sacrifices to demons by strangling the animals, and they need to quit eating blood. Now, I want to take you to some verses over in the Torah, and I want to show you that charge, that exhortation from Yaakov comes right out of the Torah. Of course it's going to come right out of the Torah. Yaakov was one who was walking in the ways of Yah, living in obedience to the Torah. So we're going to start in Exodus chapter 20. And this first one is a tenet of belief in Yah and wanting to walk in his ways. And that is the prohibition against idolatry. So come out of those pagan temples and stop worshiping those idols. Exodus chapter 20, starting with verse 1. And Elohim spoke all these words, saying, I am Yah, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, out of the house of slavery. You have no other mighty ones against my face. You are not to make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of that which is in the heavens above, or which is in the earth beneath, or which is in the waters under the earth. You do not bow down to them nor serve them, for I, Yah, your Elohim, am a jealous Ale, visiting the crookedness of the fathers on the children to the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me, but showing loving commitment to thousands to those who love me and guard my commands. And so you are not to worship idols. You are not to go after false deities. That's an abomination to Yah. You're not to make a carved image or any likeness of anything in the heavens, on the earth, under the earth. You're not to bow down to them. You're not to serve them. And so if you're coming out of paganism, if you're coming out of the mixed up religions that embraced abominable deities, false deities, multiple deities, then the first thing you have to do is get out of those temples. Get out of those temples and stop worshiping idols. Now, let's go over to Deuteronomy chapter 23. Deuteronomy chapter 23, and we're going to pick up with verse 17. And this is going to tell us that there is a Torah prohibition against temple prostitution. Starting with verse 17. None of the daughters of Israel is to be a cult prostitute, nor any of the sons of Israel be a cult prostitute. Do not bring the harlot fee of a whore or the pay of a dog. So don't bring any money that changed hands pertaining to this act of having a sexual relationship with a female prostitute or a male prostitute called a dog. Don't bring that money into the house of Yah. Do not bring the harlot fee of a whore or the pay of a dog to the house of Yah, your Elohim, for any vowed offering. For both of these are an abomination to Yah, your Elohim. What's an abomination to Yah? Engaging in cult prostitution, both female and male. Don't do it. Get out of those pagan temples. Stop worshiping idols. Stop participating in pagan temple prostitution. Don't do it. We know that there are many other commands in the Torah about illicit, abominable sexual practices. But today we're focusing mostly on what took place in the pagan temples. All right. Sacrificing to demons. Let's go over to Leviticus 17. We're going to pick up with verse 1. Notice what it says here. And Yah spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to Aharon, to his sons, and to all the children of Israel, and say to them, This is the word which Yah has commanded, saying, Any man from the house of Israel who slays a bull or a lamb or a goat in the camp, or who slays it outside the camp and does not bring it to the door of the tent of appointment to bring an offering to Yah before the dwelling place of Yah, blood guilt is reckoned to that man. In other words, you can't offer a sacrifice anywhere other than the tent of appointment or during the time of the temple, at the temple. If you make a sacrifice out in the field or in the camp or just outside of the camp, and you're not bringing that animal before you kill it to the tabernacle to slay it there, then it's an abomination to Yah. And the scripture says you're not to do it. You're offering to demons. We'll get to that in just a moment. Verse 4, and does not bring it to the door of the tent of appointment to bring an offering to Yah before the dwelling place of Yah, blood guilt is reckoned to that man. He has shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from among the people. In order that the children of Israel bring their slaughterings, which they slaughter in the open field, and they shall bring them to Yah at the door of the tent of appointment to the priest, and slaughter them as slaughterings of peace offerings to Yah. And the priest shall sprinkle the blood on the slaughter place of Yah at the door of the tent of appointment, and shall burn the fat for a sweet fragrance to Yah, and let them no longer slaughter their slaughterings to demons, after whom they whored. This is a law forever for them throughout their generations. And so this is not saying you slay an animal out in the field and drag the body over to the tabernacle. No, it's saying don't slay the animal out in the field or in your camp or just outside of the camp. Bring that animal over to the tabernacle. Why? So that it can be slaughtered correctly to Yah. And so this is a prohibition against sacrificing to demons. And Yah does not want his people sacrificing to demons. And that's what the nations were doing in the pagan temples. They were strangling the animals, because that's the way that they would kill them when they were offering animals to pagan deities. They would strangle the animals in the pagan temples, and they were offering sacrifices to demons. And Yah said, don't do that. And then it says, don't eat the blood. And that's one of the main reasons why they would strangle the animal, so that the blood stayed in the body, and then they would eat the animal, the sacrifice, with the blood in it. Yah says, don't eat blood. The life of the flesh is in the blood, and I've given it to you on the altar for atonement, so don't eat the blood. Let's go over to Leviticus chapter 3, and let's take a look in the Torah about this. Leviticus 3, verse 17. It says, an everlasting law throughout your generations in all your dwellings, you do not eat any fat or any blood. You don't eat blood, period. All right, let's go over to Leviticus chapter 7, and we'll pick up with verse 26. It says, and do not eat any blood in any of your dwellings of bird or of beast. Any being who eats any blood, even that being shall be cut off from his people. Don't eat the blood, Yah says. Now let's go over to Deuteronomy chapter 12. And we'll start here with verse 16. Deuteronomy chapter 12, starting with verse 16. Only the blood you do not eat. Pour it on the earth like water. And then verse 23. Only be strong not to eat the blood. For the blood is the life. Do not eat the life with the meat. Do not eat it. You pour it on the earth like water. Do not eat it, that it might be well with you and your children after you when you do what is right in the eyes of Yah. And so we have the Torah prohibitions that are directing what Yaakov is saying here concerning these goyim coming out of the nations, coming out of paganism, coming out of mixed up religion with abominable culture. And 4 things are the first steps, the easy stages. They're just coming out of Mitzrayim, so to speak. They're coming out of the nations. And so Yah's not going to burden them down with a bunch of religious concepts. He's not going to force them to convert to a system that's coming down, that's disappearing, but instead, he's going to lead them to the tabernacle of David, the tent of David, where they can worship him in spirit and in truth, offering up sacrifices from the altar of their hearts in praise and thanksgiving, singing, rejoicing, dancing, clapping the hands, lifting the hands. He's going to lead them by easy stages. And so there's 4 things here. And this is not all that a believer coming out of the nations must do, but it's the first steps. Abstain from idolatry. Don't participate in temple prostitution. Stop sacrificing to demons. And don't eat blood. Those 4 things, first steps. All right, let's get back over there to Acts chapter 15, and we'll finish up on this passage. Look at verse 21. This is so interesting, and most people just read right past it. They never even recognize why it's there. It says, for from ancient generations, Moshe has, in every city, those proclaiming him, or those teaching him, teaching what is in the written Torah, being read in the congregations every Sabbath. So this is not saying throw out the Torah. This is not saying there's only 4 things that those who are coming out of the nations have to do. These are the first steps. These are the first things they must do. Get out of the pagan temples. Stop worshiping idols. Stop participating in temple prostitution. Stop sacrificing to demons. And don't eat blood. And then in verse 21 it says, for from ancient generations Moshe has in every city those proclaiming him or teaching him, teaching the Torah, being read in the congregations every Sabbath. So what is that saying? Get out of the pagan temples. Get in to the synagogue where you can hear the Tanakh, the Torah, the first 5 books of Moshe, the Tanakh, all of the original Hebrew scriptures read. You have to learn what the word of Elohim is saying. So go where they're reading it, because they didn't have pocket Bibles. They didn't have family Bibles. They didn't have printing presses. If you were going to hear the word of Elohim, you had to go to the synagogue, and that's where they were reading it. So he's saying, get into the synagogue and hear the word of Yah read, and then begin to live the life that Yah is pleased with. Follow Yeshua in his lifestyle of Torah obedience. This is so powerful. Hallelujah. Let's continue. Verse 22. Then it seemed good to the emissaries and elders with all the assembly to send chosen men from among them to Antioch with Shaul and Barnabas, Yehudah being called Barsabah, and Silas, leading men among the brothers, having written in their hand this, the emissaries and the elders and the brothers, to the brothers, notice they're calling the brothers, they haven't been circumcised, they haven't been converted to Judaism, who are of the nations in Antioch and Syria and Cilicia, greetings. Since we have heard that some who went out from us have troubled you with words, unsettling your lives, overwhelming you, so much so that you might want to return to the nations, to whom we gave no command, we didn't send them. It seemed good to us, having become of one mind, to send chosen men to you with our beloved Barnabas and Shaul, men who have given up their lives for the name of our Master Yeshua Messiah. We have therefore sent Yehudah and Silas, who are also confirming this by word of mouth, for it seemed good to the set-apart Spirit, that's the Spirit of Yah, and to us, to lay upon you no greater burden than these necessities. These are first steps. We got to get you out of the pagan temples. Stop with your pagan temple worship and your sacrificing to demons. That you abstain from what is offered to idols. Don't worship idols. And blood. Don't eat the blood and the sacrifices. And what is strangled. Don't offer to demons. And whoring, temple prostitution. If you keep yourselves from these, you shall do well. Be strong. These are first steps. This is what you need to do right now as you're coming out of Mitzrayim, so to speak. As you're coming out of paganism. Do those things. And as it said over here in verse 21, then get into the synagogue and hear the word of Elohim proclaimed and begin living in a manner that pleases Yah. He goes on to say in verse 30, they therefore, being sent off, went to Antioch, and having gathered the crowd together, they delivered the letter, and having read it, they rejoiced over its encouragement. They weren't overwhelmed. They weren't discouraged. They didn't go back to paganism. They rejoiced over its encouragement. And Yehudah and Silas, being themselves also prophets, notice, encouraged the brothers with many words and strengthened them. And where do you think those words came from? They were encouraging them out of the Torah, out of the Tanakh, of course. Because the Torah, the Tanakh, that's the word of Elohim. There was no compilation of second writings, or what religion calls the New Testament. Let me read verse 32 again. And Yehudah and Silas, being themselves also prophets, encouraged the brothers with many words and strengthened them. And having spent some time, they were sent back in peace from the brothers to the emissaries. But it seemed good to Silas to remain, and Shaul and Barnabas continued in Antioch, teaching and bringing with many others also the good news, the word of Yah. And what is the word of Yah? It is the Tanakh, the original Hebrew scriptures. Again, there was no compilation of the second writings at that time. And so Yeshua, Teshuvah, Yeshua's lifestyle of Torah obedience, the empowerment that comes through water immersion, all of that can be proclaimed and should be proclaimed right out of the Tanakh, the original Hebrew scriptures. And so I want to encourage you, if you are just starting the process, come out of Egypt, come out of mixed up religion, come out of the world if you're in the world. Come out of the mixed up religions of the world, self-worship and all kinds of other philosophies and the like. Leave that behind. Come out of the pagan temples, so to speak, the way that you've worshipped self or worshipped philosophies or whatever it might be, and get you a Bible and start reading the Torah and start understanding what Yah wants you to do and how you can live in such a way that would please Him. He wants you to believe in Yeshua. He wants you to submit to water immersion. He wants you to receive from Him His set-apart spirit, to receive the I want to obey heart and the power to be obedient. And He wants you then to take this message of what he's done in your life to those in your family and in the lives of your friends and those round about you. He's not going to overwhelm you with a bunch of religious culture. He's just leading you like he did the children of Israel in the wilderness. His presence in a column of cloud by day and a fire by night. He's going to lead you. He's going to lead you by easy stages. He's going to give you the steps he wants you to walk in. And he is going to bring you to a place that will please him. And also bring you to a place where you can let your light, the light of Torah obedience, shine in this dark world. Hallelujah.